Hey, welcome to another day of the crowdfunding chat. I don't have a really fun name for this yet, so if you have cool name ideas or fun name ideas for this crowdfunding live stream that we're doing, feel free to put it down in the comments. I'm just kind of calling it crowdfunding chats right now because that's what we're doing. We're just chatting. We're just chatting, right? If you're here with me live, just be sure to comment, say hello. If you have any questions as I go, please be sure to also ask questions on the chat bar. It's there for you to get in touch with me, and I'll be sure to answer whatever I can. Okay, so today for the crowdfunding chat, I wanted to talk to you about kind of more of the basics, right? The basics being like, okay, now you want to, you want to launch your product on crowdfunding. You want to use crowdfunding because it, gets you, what do you call it, funding for your product and your idea before you launch, and you can take that money to actually bring a product to the market and bring a product to life. So that's great, right? You decided that. But now when we look at crowdfunding, there's a lot of platforms out there, a ton of platforms. What do you choose, right? How do you choose which one is the right platform for you? And I want to make kind of talk about a caveat here where the platform we're talking about here in this particular channel, kind of focuses on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. However, the principles that kind of underlie crowdfunding that we talk about are applicable to every single channel out there. It's applicable to like equity funding, like WeFunder or Start Engine. It's applicable to things like GoFundMe, right? It's applicable to things like Seed and Spark. It's applicable to tabletop game on or game on tabletop, right? It's applicable everywhere you go, just that we focus here on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. So why Kickstarter and Indiegogo? Why these two? Firstly, there's a few types of crowdfunding. One is like we were talking about equity crowdfunding. There's also where you go out and crowdfund and someone actually pays money for part of your company, like equity. There's also personal expense crowdfunding, like GoFundMe. That's a great example of it. It's known everywhere where people, if they have, for example, medical issues, they can go and get funding for paying medical bills, for example. What we focus on is rewards-based crowdfunding. And that is the type of crowdfunding where if someone pledges to your campaign and just kind of buys into your idea, buys into your crowdfunding campaign, they get a reward, some sort of reward for backing this project, for backing the product, right? So that's kind of the really 10,000 foot view of why we kind of look at all the different types of crowdfunding, and we focus on rewards-based crowdfunding, and there's multiple different platforms for rewards-based crowdfunding. To be honest, there's way more than Kickstarter and Indiegogo. But the reason we focus on these two is because they're the biggest, right? They're the biggest platforms for rewards-based crowdfunding. Kickstarter has probably about 40 million visitors from around the world every single month. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of eyeballs. That's a lot of traffic. That's a lot of people just like visiting a website, right? And Indiegogo has about maybe half of that. Right, has probably about 20 million people visiting their site. And so they're very large platforms for crowdfunding, and not like other platforms that are rewards-based crowdfunding just can't compare to the sheer size of these particular platforms. And so that's why we focus on them, right? Kickstarter being kind of, in some countries, even synonymous with the word crowdfunding. And so a lot of people, when they decide on crowdfunding, they decide, hey, I'm gonna do this crowdfunding thing. The next question becomes, okay, so now what platform do I choose? Sorry, I yawned a little bit there. I went to bed a little late. I was reading in bed really late. And so I yawned, my bad. But anyway, yeah, so Kickstarter is the biggest one. And Indiegogo is second biggest. And people wonder, okay, so if I'm launching a product, I guess I should choose the biggest one, right? I should choose Kickstarter to launch my project, right? And actually, there's different things you should kind of go through, balance, weigh, and do kind of pros and cons about before you decide which project it is, right? Which channel you're gonna go to. So let's go through it. There's 5 different things. The first thing you have to really think about when it comes to what type, which platform you want to go to is the product, the actual product type that you're crowdfunding for, right? The actual product type itself. So what that means is Kickstarter, although they're very, very big, right? They have a different focus than Indiegogo. Indiegogo has been around actually longer than Kickstarter. They got started off as kind of a crowdfunding platform for indie films, right? And now what they've actually positioned themselves to do, like they actually repositioned themselves probably in 2019 or late 2018 or something like that. They've positioned themselves to really be the main launch platform for hardware products. So hardware products, like if you want to launch a new security system or a security camera, if you want to launch like like an e-bike, if you want to launch something like a projector, if you want to launch like a drone, if you want to launch these kind of like hardware things with some technical aspect to it, or like a big hardware product, then that's what Indiegogo is great for. They pretty much like branded themselves in that way, and all the resources that they've built internally in their system helps hardware entrepreneurs launch stuff. Like they've built in like Aero certification for people who want to work with the Aero company to get help, in that in the manufacturing process, in that like product making process. They've created multiple resources, things like webinars, things like blogs that help entrepreneurs, and like just like a resource section pretty much is for hardware entrepreneurs who want to launch like physical hardware products, right? They've also partnered with a lot of different companies and agencies that specifically help in the hardware space, right? So that's kind of how that goes, right? Indiegogo is really focused on that. They've branded on that. They've figured that that is kind of the key differentiator. Oh my gosh, I need coffee. The key differentiator, what they can use in order to actually make it on, in this race between Kickstarter and Indiegogo. So now, what that means is that whenever you think about launching a product, Indiegogo is going to be the way to go if you're launching something like super technical, because they've also taken the time to build up an audience for this particular kind of branding and positioning that they're doing. So what they do is they now have people from all over the world who want to back really high-tech products. And sometimes these really high-tech products are also very expensive, right? People backing things for thousands of dollars on crowdfunding. There was a bike the other day that was like $2,000 that was on crowdfunding, and people backed it, right? So that's one thing. So with Kickstarter, what is Kickstarter, right? Kickstarter, they've branded themselves as kind of a place to launch, creative projects. Like they name it creative projects, they call it creative projects. And what that essentially means is that they want to launch things that are like more indie, right? More indie, like books or little craft items. There's a huge little market for like pins of like cartoons or pins of anime on there. They launched their biggest category is actually tabletop games, right? And so yes, tech and design do well too on Kickstarter. Yeah, tech and design, like hardware things, like when we were talking about projectors and like portable air conditioners and like what do you call it, indoor hydroponics, like growing machines. Like, yeah, they do well too on Kickstarter. But their bread and butter is a lot of the time things that are in the more indie category, namely being tabletop games. So when it comes to what platform you want to pick, it really depends on the type of product you want to launch, right? What it is, the type of product, literally just what it is. If it's if it's a tabletop game, like it's a no-brainer. Go to Kickstarter. There's a giant, giant, giant market for this on Kickstarter. If it's something like a new type of like keyboard, right? A keyboard, a super ergonomic keyboard or something, the market's going to be in Indiegogo and the resources are going to be in Indiegogo. So that's kind of the first thing you want to think about when you want to launch a product. Which platform has the audience that I'm looking for? Because if a tabletop game, for example, goes to launch on Indiegogo, that category at Indiegogo is not as well defined. There's not as many people organically going to Indiegogo for this type of product, and so for this type of tabletop game. So there's just not going to be the numbers that you want. There's not going to be a lot of the visitors. And as we know from crowdfunding, if you're able to hit your goals in crowdfunding, the platform itself starts bringing in organic traffic that just kind of browse the platform, right? So if you're a tabletop game and you go to Indiegogo and you hit your goals, the volume of tabletop people that Indiegogo will bring to your campaign is much smaller than the amount of organic traffic that Kickstarter will bring to your game if you hit your goals. So first difference. Second thing is the tracking, the ad tracking, right? This is a contentious issue, especially because, the two platforms are so different. With Indiegogo, you're allowed to put in your tracking pixels, your Facebook pixel, your Google pixel, whatever your ad tracking pixels are, right? You can put this on Indiegogo. However, on Kickstarter, they don't allow that. They're like, no, we don't want you to be tracking people. We respect people's privacy, so you can't put in tracking pixels. So what this means is it's really skewed. This means the platform kind of really skews towards the type of products too, because essentially products that want to launch hardware campaigns, for example, need to raise very high capital funding to finance their actual production. And so that's why tracking pixels on Indiegogo makes sense, because it allows people to actually track how much they're spending on ads and how much return they're getting very, very effectively, right? Quite effectively. On Indiegogo, on Kickstarter, on the other hand, since they're branded towards non-huge, large, giant, hardware campaigns like Indiegogo is, they're okay with kind of smaller creators being like these indie creators of books, of games, and things like that. They're okay with not tracking people. So because the spend isn't as large, right? There's honestly like not as much at stake when it comes to the type of spend people do. And so that's kind of the biggest difference. Like a lot of people, that is kind of the make or break for them between Kickstarter and Indiegogo, whether they could do ad tracking or not. Because some people have, tens or 50,000 or $100,000 to spend on actual crowdfunding, to spend in advertising for the crowdfunding campaign, and they want to be able to track how this spending tracks into actual revenue. And you can do it much more effectively and much easier through the Indiegogo platform, just because the tracking pixel. I'm not saying that you can't track your ads on Kickstarter, right? There are ways to do it. You can actually put in UTM tags on your ads itself. And if you know ads, you know what I'm talking about. You can put UTM tags on your ads itself, and it'll pass through to Google Analytics, and you can see your ads and its effectiveness on Google Analytics. So there's a way to do it. It's just a little more roundabout way, and a lot of indie creators, a lot of new people coming into crowdfunding just don't have the bandwidth to learn it, don't have the capacity to kind of like put this on to their plate, since they're doing so many other things already. They don't have a big team, unlike someone that's launching a big hardware campaign, right? That's the second thing. The third thing that's really different is kind of the way they work on rewards and perks. And it's a little different now too, though, because Kickstarter just introduced something new. So let's talk about Indiegogo first. With Indiegogo, you can check out multiple times. So if there's multiple perks on the page, you can check out for perk 1 and then check out again for perk 2, perk 3, perk 4, perk 5. You can do that. You can check out multiple times. But In Kickstarter, you can check out only once, right? So it kind of changes the way that you present your actual offer. So if on Indiegogo you have a perk for one thing and someone wants two, you say, hey, check out twice, you get two. Easy. But with Kickstarter, you can't tell people to check out twice. So you tell people to check out once and then add an additional donation or contribution until they reach the price of two. Right. So that's kind of different in like a kind of really like high level way. And what Indiegogo has also done recently is they've added things like items. So for example, if you have a mouse that you're launching and there's like 5 colors, what you can do is actually add color 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And people can, when they're checking out, they can actually do a drop down menu and be like, okay, I want this mouse, one of them, and I want blue, right? You can do that. With Kickstarter, you actually couldn't do that, but they recently added something similar to their platform, which is kind of cool. So that's kind of the difference. And also on Indiegogo, it's called perks. On Kickstarter, it's called rewards. But at the end of the day, it's both just a contribution, a donation. Don't expect something back. Indiegogo and Kickstarter is not a shop. It's a way to prepay for something and help someone make something if they can end up making it. Okay, so the third thing is kind of like the types of promotional channels they have. With Indiegogo, they're a little bit more open, right? They're kind of like a more open platform where you can actually like talk to people who are behind the scenes. So there's actually things on Indiegogo where you can actually go into contract with Indiegogo and be like, hey, if we go into contract with you and you know, if we raise X amount of money, can you put us in so-and-so promotion? So like in the newsletter, for example, there's different types of promotions. There's being features on the front page of Indiegogo, being talked about in their social media, being in a trending category, be in their newsletter, be in some sort of newsletter, right? So there's different types of promotions that Indiegogo does internally for their projects that you can actually like talk to a real person about. One of the most coveted things for Indiegogo is actually their newsletter. Their newsletter gets sent out to a giant list of people that love backing stuff on crowdfunding. So whenever I work on a project that's on Indiegogo, we're always trying to get on the newsletter because every time a newsletter gets sent out about the project, about the campaign, there's a huge spike in funding every single time. And it's even bigger if you're on the top spot of the newsletter, just because Indiegogo, their newsletter is just that powerful. People just open it, people back directly from it, people learn about new projects from it. It's very powerful. And when it comes to Kickstarter, similar types of promotions. There's like front page, you can be on like a trending, you can be talked about on their social, you can be in their newsletter, but it's a little more closed loop, I would say. It's a little more closed loop. So what that means is that if you want to be on their newsletter, there's actually no way to talk to someone, and it has to be. If you want to get like a Project We Love badge, there's actually no way to kind of pre-negotiate that beforehand. Like if I hit X milestone, then can I get Project We Love? There's actually no way to pre-talk about that. What else? When it comes to things like getting kind of on the front page or at the top of the newsletter, there's no one to kind of talk to, because what Kickstarter does is they really want to do this kind of internally, which I respect, right? The people on Kickstarter that work at Kickstarter kind of learn about different campaigns, different project, and then they have like meetings once a week to kind of discuss and talk about each of the projects that they're seeing coming through on their table, they're seeing, happening. And from there, they're able to kind of allocate projects according to what fits with Kickstarter's theme, what fits with what Kickstarter support, what fits with kind of the audience that's coming to Kickstarter. And they pick and choose in that way. And there's no kind of like pre-discussed negotiations beforehand, right? So that's one really cool thing about it. So yeah, for promotional channels, it's kind of similar places you can be for each of these platforms, but the way you access them, the way you get to be promoted or kind of access those promotions are very different because of kind of the nature of the platform itself. And the last thing I want to talk about here is kind of the product support that you get as a crowdfunding creator, right? This one is really different, really different between the two. When it comes to Indiegogo, you're probably going to be assigned what they call like a campaign manager or campaign strategist or a project strategist or something like that, right? Someone who will kind of help guide the way when it comes to what to do for launch. They've invested a lot in kind of growing these campaign strategists so that they could help you, the creator, to succeed on the platform. These campaign strategists have a lot of experience seeing like a whole wide variety of campaigns, what they do for pre-launch, what they do for their campaign page, what they do for their videos, what they do just in general to get a project launched. And they basically help you in any way they can to succeed. They mostly, kind of review your project through email, your content through email, through if it's a really big campaign, a really big raise, a really big funding, then they make sure to get on calls with you. But typically, you're probably accessing them through email. And with Kickstarter, though, it's not like that. You're pretty much on your own, unless you're a very, very big campaign. And a big campaign, it's like it's going to raise millions of dollars or multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars because they just don't have the capacity. Any Kickstarter team, I believe, is smaller than Indiegogo, and they've tried to kind of run a lean company. And so when you have questions, what happens, right? When it comes to if you want to launch on Kickstarter, what happens is there's actually communities that crop up on the internet that actually help with people who want to run a Kickstarter campaign. There's a forum that Kickstarter actually has where there's like answers and you can ask questions underneath it, things like that. There's Facebook groups that talk about how to launch on Kickstarter and just kind of tips and advice. And when it comes to like the category that you're in, there's very specific Facebook groups for that. So for example, if you're in a comics category, there's actually a comics specific Facebook group to help you launch comics on Kickstarter, and so on and so forth. So although the platform itself doesn't provide as much support to you as a creator, Kickstarter is so large that there is a huge community online that's kind of popped up to help creators get launched and funded on Kickstarter. So through this, we talked about 5 different things that are different. The type of product that you want to launch determines what platform. The type of tracking, the ad tracking that the platforms have, the way they deal with rewards and pledges and perks, the types of promotional channels that they have, and kind of the product support that you receive as a crowdfunding creator, as an entrepreneur going to crowdfunding. So at the end of the day, people always ask, like, what do I choose? What do I choose? And to be honest, probably the most important two things to consider is the type of product you're launching and the type of tracking that you kind of want to have. Product, because you want to be shown to an audience that likes your product. So again, if I'm launching a game, I'm never going to go to Indiegogo because the Indiegogo market isn't looking for games. The audience on Indiegogo is not looking for tabletop games and strategy games and family games and party games. Not looking for that at all. The people on Indiegogo are looking for just like hardware products like drones and projectors and mini phones and like all these technical hardware things. They're looking for that instead of a game. Right. So that's I think out of all these things that we talked about, the most important thing, because everything else like rewards and perks, you can figure out around a way to roll out your rewards and perk that works for your particular project. Promotional channels, like you can pre-plan a lot of promotions outside of the crowdfunding platform, and you can find your own crowd and your own audience and push them all in the crowdfunding platform too, and kind of get promotions that work for those channels outside of the crowdfunding platform itself. And project support, I created Crush Crowdfunding just to do this, to help people launch their ideas on Kickstarter and Indiegogo. And there's, to be honest, a lot of other resources for people to get help to launch their idea too. So I don't think the level of product support should be the determining factor, because there's so much knowledge on the internet. You can just go up and Google so many things and find out so many things. So again, what product you have and what category your product is in will really determine where you want to launch. So like if you have something with a coffee related theme, Kickstarter has a huge coffee niche, right? There's a giant niche in Kickstarter that talks about just coffee grinders, coffee, like single cup coffee machines, and like latte making machines. And there's like a huge coffee niche. And cats too. If you want to go on something for cats, there's a huge cat niche on Kickstarter, right? So it really depends on the type of product that you want to launch. If you want to launch an e-bike, go to Kickstarter. Go to Indiegogo, because there's a huge market for that there. So product is the biggest determining factor between all these five. So yeah, that pretty much sums it up for today. If you liked what you're listening to here, be sure to come back. I'm going to do this every morning at 8:30 a.m. Pacific. And, be sure to hit subscribe so you get notified when I go live. And, if you are looking for just resources to help you launch on crowdfunding, be sure I launched a new crowdfunding resource shop for you. And it's at crushcrowdfunding.com/resources, RESOURCES. And there's a ton of things, like there's ad swipe files, there's landing page swipe files, there's like PR and pitch templates. There's so many things out there that you can just take and apply to your own project and get funded. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow. I'm trying to stop this video. All right, bye.